Hi, I'm Caroline Mitchell, Canine Behaviourist at Good Doggy. So getting to the bottom of why our dogs do what they do is a massive part of the rehabilitation process. Figuring out why they do what they do sets us up for long-term solutions. If we don't address that properly, we'll end up with solutions that are weak, or the results will be disappointing or short-lived. So in this video, I'm going to talk about why it's important to get to the bottom of why dogs do what they do, and why it's the most important part of rehab. And in this video, I'm going to talk a lot about fence guarding, but you could apply this to almost any kind of problem. The important thing is to get to the real guts of why your dog's doing what you're doing, because that will tell you how to start going about fixing it. So I said we're going to talk about fence guarding. So let's ask ourselves why a dog might be guarding their fence. So the answer could be here that he's guarding his fence because he can see people on the other side. Simple enough. If we decided to stop there and we go, that seems like a good enough reason, then we might try it and solve the problem by just building a better fence. Maybe we try and build a fence that he can't see through. So he won't be able to see people on the other side. And maybe that will solve our problem. And probably it will help a bit. But then what happens if the people walking past your fence now start to talk to each other? He'll be able to hear them. And I bet he will still react to that. So now he can hear people on the other side of the fence but not see them. So rather than seeing them as being his trigger, now he's waiting to see if he can hear them. So now he'll perhaps, when he's out in the garden, start listening out for people instead. If he reacts to that, then there's a good chance anyway he'll still react to other noises. So for example, maybe a cat outside, cars going by, other neighbours and things like that. So what we know now is that actually seeing the people was not the problem. That's not going to be an effective solution for this problem. He's still guarding his fence. So do we get him some earmuffs so he can't hear them as well? We could try that, but this problem is not going away. He still is concerned about people being near his fence. So let's keep asking why again. Why is he guarding the fence? Why does it matter that there are people on the other side of the fence? And the answer to that is he's scared. He's scared of people coming in. He's scared of people coming in because he feels that that resource is unprotected. We ask ourselves, why does he feel unsafe? Maybe it's because he feels that that resource feels scarce to him. If you're not sure what kind of resource that could be, if we're not sure what it is he's trying to save, then we could have a look at Maslow's pyramid of needs. I did a video of this a few weeks ago. You can refer back to that. And the video goes into a lot more detail about the pyramid and how it kind of changes the way a dog makes decisions, changes the way their behaviors go. And it also tells us about a dog's basic needs, and it puts them in an order of importance. So we could use this as a reference. So on the pyramid of needs, on the second most important layer, we have safety needs, and that includes our resources and it includes our territory and things like that. So we can look at this pyramid and look at all these other needs, and we could start to think what kind of resonates with us. So maybe if a dog is resource guarding food is on the very bottom of the pyramid. That's a very, very primal need. So that's a primary need, much more important than the security of a fence. A partner, sexual partner, reproduction is on the bottom as well. So if you've got a dog that is humping, then we can look at that. That's a need that your dog is trying to fulfill. If you're seeing a behavior problem connected with that part of the pyramid, that's the need that's trying to fulfill. So now we know the need. And the next thing we need to know is what the emotion is. So for our dog that's fence guarding, we knew the need was security, and we know the emotion is fear. Just by watching them, we can see they're being aggressive and defensive. They're trying to get things to leave. So we know in this case the emotion is fear and it's security. That is the problem that has been threatened. So now we're sort of starting to get somewhere. When we get to the very bottom of things, we might discover a whole selection of ideas that we can use to solve our problem. So we asked why a few times. We got better fence, we got earmuffs, we got asking people to walk somewhere else. And there's nothing wrong with those as a part of your plan. but he is still going to feel anxious when people and things come near the house. So that's why we need to address that feeling of security. In the short term, we will see the symptoms go away. So if we stopped people walking past your house, then he will stop barking and guarding the fence. But inside, that anxiety is still there, and it will come back then at a later date. So we've basically had the illusion of solving a problem. I often see this kind of thing happen when people change a doorbell for a knocker, for example, or maybe they ask their friends to text them when they're coming to visit. In the first instance, the dog is much calmer when people come in because that initial trigger wasn't there to alert the dog that something was happening. So immediately the behaviour, the symptom seems to kind of go away, and it feels like you've achieved something. You think, oh, that's good. We've managed to get around that. But what will happen is your dog will soon figure out different ways to identify when a new visitor is coming. I've seen dogs that have learnt how to know when the text goes off on your phone, and you look at the phone and then you stand up and you start to walk towards the door. That's their trigger. They've started to associate this new behaviour from you with the visitor coming. So the doorbell and the door knocker, those ones are not triggering that feeling anymore. So your dog's looking for different ways of knowing when this event is about to happen. This could also be something like fluffing up cushions. I remember meeting a lady a few years ago who would fluff up the cushions. She would get a text message from her friends to tell her that they were coming, and then she would start fluffing the cushions. So as soon as those two things happened side by side, the dog knew somebody was coming, and whilst for the original period of them not using the doorbell had calmed the dog when people come in, as soon as he'd figured out that this was the new trigger for that, then his behaviour just reverted to the old one. It was still in there. The dog still had this emotional response to people coming in. It's just that for a temporary amount of time, the trigger had changed, and that was what the problem was here. People often do this when they know their dog gets very excited when they're invited out for a walk, so they start learning different ways to announce they're going to take their dog for a walk. So maybe they start to spell it, use a different word, things like that. And in the short term, again, this has an impact because that trigger word has not triggered that emotional, in this case, excitement from your dog. But it won't take him very long before he figures out a different trigger. So that could be you just spelling it. It could be a different word. It could be something completely different. Maybe you just have something you always do before you take your dog for a walk. Maybe you put your cup in the kitchen, or maybe you shout up to your wife, or something along those lines. But once he's figured that out, that emotional response is still there, and it will just come out with the new trigger instead of the old one. So this is why asking why the problem is there, addressing the need and the emotion is really important, and doing them both together. Otherwise, we just end up going round and round in circles and never really achieving the actual goal. Asking why and trying to get to the need and the emotion is really important as well for tricky behaviours. I regularly get people contacting me with some very obscure and tricky and bizarre kinds of behaviours that they've struggled with. And when you look at that message that you get, your immediate response is, oh my God, how do you even go about starting to solve that? Then when you start looking at your pyramid of needs and you start thinking about the emotion that's connected, things suddenly start to feel simpler. They start to feel a bit more achievable, and ideas start coming to you. So currently I've been working with a dog that on the surface is showing some very odd and challenging behaviours. He has developed a dangerous obsession over water, and he was making himself really ill because of it. So we could overcomplicate this. We could start thinking about why would a dog obsess over water and just stop trying to deal with that. But actually what we need to do is we need to start getting to the very basics of this problem before we start trying to work on a solution. When we get to the heart of it, it will be much, much easier. So obviously the first instinct here was to check that he was in good health. So a vet visit was important, and the vet were very thorough, and they did lots and lots of tests on him to make sure that he was in good health, and that actually there wasn't an underlying condition that would cause him to obsess over water in this really, really unhealthy, dangerous way. We could fixate on the water part then, but what we did instead was really start to go, why is he obsessing over water? So when we start to ask why the water, we could just take the whole water element out of it and just think about it as just a resource. It's a resource that he has learnt to protect, that has become important to him. We can connect that to an emotion, which in this case was overexcitement. And now we have a dog now that he can't even leave the house really without being stuck on a lead, without his owner being vigilant, looking out for every single puddle, every single thing. And what happens when you end up with a scarcity mindset problem, and if you have a look, I think the last video I made was about scarcity mindset and how that can come about, is that limiting that resource doesn't help. So the advice that they'd been given was to really limit the amount of water he was having, because actually he was being really sick. He was drinking far too much water and it was making him really, really ill. He was drinking any liquid or water he could find until it was gone. And even then he would continue to lick and lick and lick, trying to get every last bit of moisture. It became a real obsession. It was dangerous for him because he was being sick a lot. So the instinct is to stop giving him water and to keep him away from water. But of course, that doesn't help with a scarcity mindset. What we needed to do was teach him there was an abundance of water. So in order to do that, we had to offer him very tiny amounts of water, but constantly through the day. And we would then gradually start to increase the amount of water he could have, but also decrease the frequency. So it was overall similar amounts, to a point where eventually we were able to offer him a full bowl of water, and he would just take what he needed and walked away. And that's what he can do now. He can walk past puddles, he can walk past spills, he leaves water in his bowl, he knows when he's had enough, and crucially hasn't been sick for a long time. So we could have just stopped with that. Let's try and desensitize him to water, let's teach him a different response to water. But actually what we needed to do was to get right down into the heart of it. Why is he guarding water? Because he believes it will run out. And that was the whole thing that we needed to get to. Other trainers might have tried to give him treats and get him to walk past puddles and waters, and that might have helped a little bit, but on its own it wouldn't have been enough, in the same way that getting him to changing your doorbell isn't enough, in the same way that blocking up your fence on its own is not enough. So the solution for our fence guarder, we need to work on building confidence. We know that he is showing anxious behavior. So any anxious behavior can be helped by building confidence, and you can do that in lots of different ways. So routine is a really good one. Building in routine means that things become predictable for your dog. He knows when stuff is coming. Predictability is the opposite of anxiety. It gives predictable results. So he knows what's happening in his day and when it's happening. So that's one thing that he doesn't have to think about. So one element of stress in his day is now gone. We need to give him a little bit of an outlet. So if he is barking at the fence, we don't want to stop him from barking at the fence. That's his outlet for that stress. When we have stress build up, we need to let it out. As people, we will let our stress out by maybe having a rant on Facebook. We might have a cry. We might shout at something. We might go for a run. When you get that kind of stress up, you need to let it out somehow. Barking is a really good way of reducing stress, but other things can work too. So dogs do love to run, they love to sniff. So those kinds of things are really helpful. So I did a whole video about that, so check that out and find different ways of just reducing your dog's overall stress levels throughout the day. Dogs that worry about resources definitely need to feel like they're in control of stuff, and they need to feel like they can predict when it's coming. A better fence will help because, as we know, it will stop him from seeing people. Just like the doorbell switch will have a temporary effect, it will be a temporary effect when used on its own. But when we use it as a part of a plan, we can actually get better results because it gives your dog a break from the original behavior, which we know every time he does that, every time he guards his fence, every time he scares somebody away, it's going to reinforce to him that that was a good thing to do and that he did a good job. So we want to take the reward element away from that. And the best way to do that is just to prevent it from happening. So give him a little detox, a little break from that old behavior is really useful. And while that's happening, we're rushing behind the scenes to create a new behavior, which also makes him feel good instead. So to do that, we might create a routine for the front door, for example. So when we've made a door answering protocol for inviting guests in, that includes him, that can help build up confidence too. It gives him a different behavior to do while you're inviting people in. He'll be able to see that happening, so he'll feel a part of it, so he feels a little bit in control. predictable because he knows he's going to get a treat at the end of it, which is rewarding. That will replace the reward he was seeking before with the old behavior. And this all takes time, so you need to repeat this a lot of times. So if you're doing a door answering routine, don't just rely on doing this when somebody actually comes to your door. Set aside time every day to do 5 or 6 run-throughs, so that you can just practice it and practice. Practice is what makes a behavior habitual. It makes it something that he will do automatically. And that's what you need in those moments of excitement and stress and anxiety. Any kind of increased emotion needs an instinctive response. So you're never going to get that by just practice it randomly when stuff happens. You need to drill it into them almost. This is like doing your scales if you're learning to play a musical instrument, and practicing the pieces that you play before you go to a concert. Nobody ever learned how to play the piano in a few lessons and then decided to do a concert for the first time and learn and play that piece for the first time. We practice and practice and practice so that we don't have to think about what we're doing. And your dog needs that when it comes to these kind of door answering routines. While we are creating a new behavioral response, a new emotional response will be forming by itself. And your goal here is to get that in place before he starts to figure out what the old triggers were and starts to go back to those old habits. So we've got lots of different ways here that we could support him. And because we kept on asking, why is he doing this? Why is he doing this? Why is he doing this? We looked at the pyramid of needs. We looked at the emotional response that was connected to that. We managed to find a plan which included 6 different elements here that we can now use to help him get past this behavior problem. But we could have just stopped with, he's barking at the front door because the doorbell's making him do it. He's barking at the people because he can see them. He's resource guarding water because he can see water. If we just stopped there, we never would have actually solved the problem. And you can see how those results would be short-lived and disappointing in the long run, and how you would constantly just go around these cycles thinking nothing is actually working. And can my dog's behavior ever actually be changed? Yes, it can, but you can't do it with just, when you just ask why once or twice. You really do need to get full into that assessment and find out exactly what's gone wrong. And that's how you come up with a much better solution, a more permanent solution to dog behaviour. Speak to you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.